Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow, and we are back here in the Hendrickson Library at the Center for the Institute for the Preservation of Western Civilization. Greetings and welcome. That's all. Yeah,
yes,
I'm glad you're here,
yeah.
John. I could tell it was actually time to record because I came up to the studio today and I didn't even need to tell you that it was time to record. And you just showed up after I was here for about 5 minutes getting ready. Here rolls in John. It's like, okay, clearly it was meant to be today. So I'm excited for that. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, but I want to remind folks that you can get the ITR Live podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, whether it's audio or video. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on all those other third-tier platforms, if that's what you're into, but also on YouTube and Rumble. So check us out there and subscribe and make sure you're getting all the content. What else? Any other administrative things we need to cover? I'm trying to do better at getting those on the front end.
I don't think so. I think that's you hit the right stuff.
Good. So we've got some content that is really dry we're going to try and get into today. So bear with us, folks, and we will try and make it as fun as we can. I'm going to start off today actually on a really sad note. Since we last recorded, the passing of State Representative Martin Graber. And he very unexpected, and I don't know that you ever had a chance to meet Representative Graber. He was elected after my time in the legislature, but I did meet him a few times. Very kind man, but very unexpected. And I had a lot of my friends that I know in the legislature posted about how they saw him on Thursday afternoon and it passed away either that night or the next morning. So our condolences, our thoughts, our prayers out to his family and his friends and his colleagues in the Iowa House. And I will say too that your caucus, it does, I don't want to over dramatize it, John, but there's a little bit like a family, and that's sometimes how you thought about it. You can fight with people in your caucus like brothers and sisters sometimes do, but there is when you do a thing together, there is sort of a camaraderie that builds, and maybe it's just spending a lot of long evenings and you spend a lot of time talking to people, and so it is. I know that it's a really sad thing for those that served with him and obviously in his family as well. So passing that along as well. The legislature is certainly in full swing now. One thing that's dragging this out, John, I feel like I'm just doing a monologue today here, but the first legislative funnel is a little later than normal. Obviously, the first year of a 2-year General Assembly, but it's not even until March. So there's a lot of time that's sometimes it feels very rushed trying to get all these things through the legislature, but there's a lot of stuff out there.
Yes, yeah.
And I know you do a lot of trying to keep track of it, but there is certainly a high volume of legislation out there. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so. Yeah, yeah. There's quite a few bills out there. A lot on education right now. Yeah, seems to be the.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna talk about that specifically, supplemental state aid today. There's a lot of stuff that pops up and gets some attention, and we pay attention to it. That probably doesn't ever have any chance at all of becoming law. Legislators, I know this might come as a shock to a lot of people, will offer legislation they have no belief will ever become law. They just throw it out. They got a couple of constituents back home that, hey, this is a great idea. Let's how about this new tax credit? Like, come on, we don't need another tax credit for somebody back home. So, but yet here they are, and we've got to pay attention to them. As an aside, John, you and I are of one mind. This organization, we don't need any more tax credits in the state of Iowa, right?
Yeah.
So if you are a legislator listening and you have been approached by somebody about the idea of submitting a new tax credit, just say no.
Yeah.
Okay? No new tax credit. Now, if you come to me and say, hey, got this really good cause, maybe we should appropriate some money for it. Well, I don't know that it's the most fiscally conservative thing in the world to do, but I will listen to that. Mm-hmm. If it's so compelling that you need a new tax credit for it, just put it in the budget. Okay?
That's right.
No matter how compelling.
Yeah.
Because the day is coming, because it seems like the problem's starting to get a little worse. I don't want to have to register against all these bills, but we may actually get there. And maybe they don't care whether we register against them or not, but no more new tax credits, please. Okay. So let's get down to business, John. We talked about this a little bit this morning before we recorded, but the issue of supplemental state aid. And so I want to spend just a little bit of time on this because this seems like one of two big issues that the legislature is actually wrestling with right now. Is that right? Or am I? It's the casino moratorium, which we talked about last time, and that's in the next week or so, or it's done because it has to be done.
Yeah.
The other is supplemental state aid. So taking away some of the labels in the this is public and private K-12 school funding for the next fiscal year. That's what we're talking about. So I'm going to try and walk through this, and you tell me if you think I'm missing this. And because folks, I think a lot of folks don't completely understand how this works. I'm not even sure I completely understand all the nuances of it.
It's very complicated.
It is. So,
and I'll just say quickly that and one of the reasons why this is so important is it's about half the general fund budget.
Yes, it is. It is a lot of frankly, what the state spends. And not only is it roughly half, I think it's over half, all in on education of the state general fund, it's over half of your local property tax bill as well. So what's going on with schools is very important. So the way this works is the state every year comes in and sets what's called, a district cost per pupil or a statewide cost per pupil. We're going to use those interchangeably because I don't want to make this any more complicated than it is. But the state sets how much each school district can spend per student. So you have a certain number of students in your district times the number of the cost per pupil. That's your spending limit. And so they control that. And then every year by law, the legislature is to set the next year's increase in that amount of funding in the first 30 days. Don't always do it because the legislature has the ability to ignore the law as much as they have the ability to make the law. But so that's the issue, is how much. And so you'll hear it referenced usually as a percentage. So the current proposal is Senate Republicans proposed a 2% increase in supplemental state aid, or SSA. The House hasn't quite landed where they're at. Speaking from experience, you're going to have a wide range of opinion in the House, and that's healthy of what to do. Legislative Democrats have proposed 5% growth in that, and that's fine. They're always going to be way high because they always want to spend more. Anyway, that's what's going on here. How am I doing so far?
You're doing good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now here's where it's going to get really dry.
Yes,
So I mean, look, it's school funding in Iowa is a mix of state dollars and local dollars. And so this is an important point. So we take a certain chunk out of the state general fund that goes to schools, and also a formula that is your local property tax dollars. So if it's a 2%, this is important. It's not just that the state's going to kick in 2% more money. Your property taxes are going up too. And we've sort of said, look, that's a modest amount every year. We're not going to oppose that. But I think it's important that folks understand that when this decision is being made, there is a property tax element to it.
Absolutely, yes.
And so I'm going to back into this, but I don't know, John, this is a really rough estimate. We were trying to look at last year's notes, but last year was it 2.5 or 3 did they end up at? We were looking at this.
I think it was 2.5. I
think it was 2.5, which was about $50 million in property taxes statewide. So back that out plus some growth. I mean, you're a 2% probably is a $40 to $45 million property tax increase. Again, we're not necessarily registering an opposition to that, but it's an important factor. So anyway, I don't know if folks really care how that split works, but it doesn't matter where you're at. And here's where stick with me. The way it works is there's 3 there's 3 tranches, there's 3 components of that school funding. Right off the bat, no matter what school district you're in, the first $5.40 on your levy per $1,000 on your property tax bill goes to your local school district. It's the same no matter what district you're in. And that fills up that think of the 100% as a bucket, right? That fills up a certain amount of the bucket in each district. Then the state contributes the money to get you up to, is it 88? I thought it was 88.5, but the stuff from LSA said 88.4.
Yes. Yep.
So 88.4% of the bucket then gets filled with state dollars. So that's the same for every district now. And then the remainder of that 11 and change percent again goes back on the property taxpayer.
Yep, that's correct.
That's the foundation aid formula. So you hear sometimes, when this is talked about, the idea of property rich districts and property poor districts. So going back to that first $5.40 per thousand, right? If you have a really high collective valuation of your property, then that $5.40 is going to generate a lot of revenue for your schools. Mm-hmm. If you live in a district that doesn't have that kind of broad property valuation, think of it as a property poor district. And I think those are somewhat pejorative, and I've never really been comfortable with it. But then that doesn't generate as much, and so the state puts more dollars in to get you to the 88.4%. So if you live in, let's take, for example, there's some districts in southern Iowa that are considered more property poor. They need more state dollars to get to that 88.4%. Whereas if you live in the Okoboji School District, that 540 almost pays the entire amount.
Yes,
I think. Is that right?
Yeah.
We've looked at this in the past.
That's a big issue of concern for them out there.
So you have all of these homes on the lake, and I don't think anybody's really crying a lot for the folks that have the $3 million vacation homes, but that is a lot of property taxes being spun off of that lake, and they don't even usually have kids that are enrolled in that district. Usually they're at their they're going to Waukee Northwest and paying the amount up there. So anyway, that's more or less how it works, and the net of it is actually on a per parcel basis or per home. You're actually going to pay more for those schools in that property poor district on a apples to apples basis. So I kind of I don't know why I felt compelled to walk through that with people, but there's the meat and potatoes of it. So the legislature is going to wrestle with this. I think it is. What's your perspective on the debate over SSA? And so now I'm done with my monologue, and I want to get what your what are the considerations as we think about SSA or think about public education funding?
Well, I think there's a couple things. The main thing is you hear a lot of times that constantly you hear in the media, and especially of critics of the governor and the legislature, that education is underfunded. And I don't think a lot of people realize how much that public education takes up of the general fund budget. Yeah. And then also that how much it consumes of your property tax bill. And as you said, that is a leading driver. So I mean, and education, as I've said before, it's probably the only line item in the budget that's guaranteed to increase every single year. The debate is over what's the percentage of increase, and so that's the important part of it. And that's not saying that education's not a priority. It is, obviously,
right.
But I think we have to look at it because throwing more money at education doesn't mean you're going to improve the quality of it. And for example, I saw the governor put out a press release today about legislation that she's going to try to improve math and civic education. And so, there's some really major problems within Iowa education about student outcomes and learning, and it's not necessarily all tied to funding. And so I think that point needs to be made as well. But in terms of this, the funding, the other thing I think that we need to talk about, and certainly that won't happen this session and probably not anytime soon, is I think there's going to have to be some type of reform in the near future of the school funding formula, because one is the whole property tax situation that has to be resolved. And I mean, we can address the city and county aspect, and we've talked about that with the property tax cap, but you still have the school situation out there. And so I think in order to do that, you're going to have to address the funding formula, and that's going to be a huge undertaking.
That is true, John, and I've said in I don't know, conversations that I've had at events, at when I've speaking engagements. I just had one last week where how do you cut property taxes? Well, if you're serious about that, you have to look. You would have to look at school funding because it's such a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And so far, I don't think anyone in this state, there's anywhere near the political will to even start down that path, because it's all Iowans want their schools to work well. I even folks like us who are very conservative and we want more out of that.
Yes.
We want them to do better.
Yeah.
But we all want to have strong schools. Maybe not everybody, but I think most do.
Yeah.
And most acknowledge that costs money. But you're exactly right. It's the only line item in the budget that I think gets a guaranteed increase every year. But the reform in how we do it is long overdue. There's complexities to this system well beyond what I walked through, and I certainly don't consider myself qualified to render an opinion on those, I guess, in some of the little details. But there aren't that many people left that understand it all, that aren't kind of invested in the system that we have. And so where do you generate the will to have that reform conversation? I think we still need to get a little bit further past the ESA debate, conversation, implementation, before we really can dig into the complete reformation of the school funding formula.
Yeah.
I think that is where we land on that in the next few years is still a little bit of a moving target, and how that's implemented. I could be wrong, but that strikes me that we need to need to fully adapt to that new system.
Yeah.
The other one is that makes that complicated is just like we talked about that property rich district versus property poor district. Once you crack open that formula and change that, you're going to have different districts that win or lose on that reform.
Yeah.
So you're going to have a district that right now draws down, for example, a lot of state dollars. Well, maybe they don't get to draw down as many, and now it's even more on property taxes in their district. Well, they're not going to like that.
That's right. Yeah.
And conversely with the property rich district. And so that's probably the single thing that would make changing the formula so difficult, because the legislators from those disparate districts are going to have something to say about that. They have to. They wouldn't be doing their job if they didn't stand up for the interests in their districts. So,
and I've seen that actually. When we go out and visit with people, I remember going to one community, and there's a lot of resentment, for better or for worse. I remember talking with a group of people, and they were upset because their district didn't have the fancy equipment as some of the fancy things that you see here in the metro, you would find in Waukee.
Like an auditorium?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, just like a $30 million fancy thing? Okay, just curious.
And so you see a lot of, I don't want to say, I guess it would be resentment.
Yeah.
But I think you're not going to have, I don't think you'll ever find a system where everything is equal like that, because that's just, there's going to be always areas in Iowa that are different, that are more faster growing. And
I think that's right, John.
So it's going to be hard to have everything always equal.
And I think that is often, and it's not just in school funding, this plays out in other state budget debates, the tension that exists between rural Iowa and urban areas. Is that the things that matter, that drive decision-making in Waukee or Des Moines or Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, pick your area. I mean, we all know what they're a lot different than they are if you're in small-town Iowa, rural Iowa.
Yeah.
And things are good in Waukee. There's construction up all around the west suburbs of Des Moines. Or if you're up in Ankeny, they can't build fast enough. But, some of the small towns would love to have any growth. And so that tension exists, not just in school funding, but in a lot of things. And that's, frankly, it's healthy. But life has changed in rural Iowa over the last several decades. And I think that's continuing. There's areas that are coming back that things are good. But anyway, that's
the other thing I think with education that we're. I don't think people like to talk about it, but I think we're going to see some, possibly some forced consolidations in the future.
Yeah.
With challenges to populations and shrinking districts and.
Well, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
We probably should do some additional work on that, John. But the whole consolidation, sharing of services, whether it's between city, counties, and schools, or it's between separate jurisdictions, some of that's already happened. But you hear the one I hear over and over when I'm out talking to folks is, why does Iowa have 99 counties? Why can't we merge them together? I don't disagree. I would say, though, is that some of those services we've already started combining or sharing. And I would suggest that there's a lot of additional overlap that exists with having 960-some cities. And why can't we continue down the path of sharing all the services? Okay, we've got a lot of elected officials, and maybe we could grow to a point where we don't need that as much. But we can certainly find those efficiencies now without actually taking the extra step of closing down divisions of government. So let's do that. Let's incentivize locals and not have it just be, well, I don't want to lose my police department. If I merge with the next town over, I lose my police department. Well, you know what? Hey, then explain that to your voters. But combining those police forces or asking the sheriff to take care of it, like, that saves money. That makes you stronger.
Yeah.
They're just value decisions, but maybe we can do more at the state level to help encourage some of that. Okay, I didn't anticipate a conversation about school aid to take 20 minutes on this podcast, John. So well done for dragging that out really long. There's one other thing that it was covered in Axios this morning, but the report's been out for a couple weeks, and that was what was it called? The State Treasurer Robbie Smith had Iowa Outstanding State and Local Government Report for fiscal year 2024 with state obligations, debt obligations. So here's the top line number. Across all levels of Iowa government, outstanding debt obligations totaled $21.9 billion as of the end of the last fiscal year, June 30th, 2024. $21.9 billion of debt. You got nothing for me on that, John? That's almost 3 times the state budget.
Yeah. This is and that's state and local debt combined.
Yeah, that's all types.
Yeah, this is look, I think we're in a situation here when we see reports like this, and obviously it's even worse when we look at the federal government. But I think this is where, and I know our listeners probably get tired of hearing us, but this is why spending gets to be such an important issue.
Right.
Because I think there's a day of reckoning coming. And just one example, when last week when the White House put out the executive order about freezing the funds, and everyone kind of panicked about grants.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just should have been a warning of how much we're addicted to federal funds.
Yeah.
Not just at the state, but even at the local level. But and this should also be a warning that we need to start addressing what we're spending, whether it's at the state or local level. And I think the state has done some good things at starting to rein in spending, but it's very hard. It's very hard to do that because there's so many demands on government. But I think especially at the local level, I mean, I was reading, the other day and you and I have seen this. I mean, there's all these local governments that are buying into these economic development projects and getting all of this. And so the problem is when is this going to come? When is this debt going to come due? And,
well, that's worrying about individual consumer debt.
Yes,
and all kinds of debt up and down, the ladder. We've got a spending problem and a debt problem, both in public and private in this country.
Yeah.
And that is concerning.
What scares me at the local level, when you look at, I think at government at any level, but look at the local level, when you have high property taxes and high debt level, that doesn't look good for a fiscal future.
No, I'm going to break this down real quick in case folks are curious. $1.8 billion at the Board of Regents. Some of those projects, there may be a funding stream tied to. I'm not justifying or whatever any of it, but sometimes the regents in some of those projects work a little bit differently. Cities, a little over $8.2 billion, and that was a 5% increase from the year before. You might have, what would be a city? I mean, you're talking about city council chambers. You're talking about maybe a water. I don't know. I don't know. A lot of that feels like community centers and aquatic parks and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. Schools, AEAs, $5.5 billion. Now you're gonna have new schools in there and auditoriums. There's gonna be that kind of stuff, but that's a lot of debt. The state between agencies and authorities is about $5.5 billion. Again, there's some of that is, when it's state authorities, that'd be, for example, I think a lot of it's probably within the Iowa Economic Development Authority and some of the things that they guarantee. And I think that operates a little bit differently than some of the stuff that's straight on the property tax rolls. Community colleges, $650 million. Counties, $1.15 billion. No, yes. I'm sorry. I'm trying to keep track of all these digits. It's getting a lot.
Yeah.
I gotta count digits here. $1.153 billion, which is an 11-point increase from the year before, and I think a lot of that is jails, although in some areas it's administration buildings and whatnot. So, almost $22 billion of debt in the state of Iowa. We've written on this before, John, but I guess I didn't want to miss an opportunity to talk about it. The state treasurer's actually got kind of if you really want to go deep on this, there is, he's got a whole website, is Debt Reporting Iowa, where you can go in and really dig in depth on all this stuff. So if you really want to find out what's going on in your community, we've got a lot of that information at itrlocal.org, and if you want to compare it, but here's another layer of information that you can get to. So, and did I show you what I got from my city?
No,
today? There's
no.
just a little palate cleanser here at the end of the day. So I got a postcard in the mail introducing me to my mayor and city council in Urbandale. It was sent to every postal customer in the city. Just had their head and shoulders portraits on there, introducing themselves, and I not much else other than they are the ones that are giving me all of the things, I guess, that I appreciate about living in my city. But felt a little like campaign piece, I guess.
Yeah. It's interesting how that can be sent, but not a taxpayer notice.
Well, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, my guess is I was talking with our mail expert here at ITR World headquarters, and he thinks that was, we calculated probably cost him about $5,000 to send that mail piece out. Probably not a lot of money in light of the entire city budget. However, it's just one small little thing that makes me a little less patient when I hear them complaining about the need to cut spending. And my city has done a reasonable job over the last few years, but those are the little things. They're like welcome signs. It's like, come on, do we need that?
That could be $5,000 to Bravo.
Yeah, that's right. Or in universal basic income
that's
handouts.
Right.
I mean, think of what you could do with $5,000. Think of the poor folks that can't go to the gala. Okay. All right. Well, good. I'm glad we wrapped up with that. I feel a lot better now.
Yeah.
So, all right, John, anything else you've got for us today?
Well, when you're talking about the debt, it reminded me of a quick story I'll share with the listeners about one of my favorite governors. It was actually from Minnesota, but he was Governor Theodore Christensen, and they nicknamed him Tightwad Ted.
Okay.
And his campaign slogan, he was governor during the 20s, and his campaign slogan was more Ted, less taxes.
Okay.
And his whole platform was cutting spending and paying down debt and reducing taxes, and that's exactly what he did.
Good.
And so, tightwad Ted. And
All right.
So
we need a nickname for you.
Yeah.
More John and less taxes or something. Yeah. Anyway, well, good. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for bearing with me in a long discussion of the nuances of school funding and debt obligations. But if you made it this far, somehow or other, we need to give you a special participation trophy because it took some work today.
Yeah, and I kind of wish we had 20 more minutes to talk about the tariffs.
We don't, John.
That was a big story.
Well,
this
I
weekend.
asked you before we came in. It's like, John, you got anything you want to talk about? Nope, I'm good. And then now here we are, 30 minutes in. We've drugged them through a conversation of debt and school funding, and now we're going to talk about tariffs.
Yeah.
Okay. You're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait an episode. Yeah. So anyway, just a little preview. John's all in on the trade wars, so he's ready to go. So all right, listeners. Thanks again. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends. And with that, we will see you next time on ITR Live.